Hello everybody, my name is Mike Geig and I wanted to go ahead and kick off this live presentation with Unity. Everyone in chat, yay, it's live. Hey everybody. Okay, so far today, just want to make sure that we're not having any technical issues and then we'll go ahead and get started. But everything looks to be working great, so I love the second time we use new technology because there's always a lot less bugs than the first time we use technology. So, how am I sounding? Volume is a tad low. You'll have to probably turn up your volume if I sound a bit low. Otherwise, we have a bit of an echo or noise that kind of ghosts with the live presentation. So this is about as loud as I can make it without some serious audio artifacts. So you might need to just turn up your own stuff. Yeah. Okay, and no, I'm not from Texas. Sorry, I'm from Ohio. I see Dave here asked if I was from Texas. So before we get started, I do want to pop this up on the screen here. This is a live presentation with Unity. We'll be going over terrain and environments. And if you have any questions or any comments or just want to chat with us either during the live presentation or after, we have the chat going in both Twitch and chat roll on our page, and also you can follow us on Twitter at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, at Will Goldstone, and at the Ant Ranch. All right. So, real quick, a question here: is this beginner level, advanced, super expert level? It is beginner. It is for environments and stuff like that. Though, if you don't know how to do this stuff, then I guess it would be advanced to you. So I guess that, yeah, I guess that's to answer your question. Okay. So now that I've got all that stuff out of the way, we can go ahead and begin. Normally I have some people helping me monitor chat. Today they are not here, so if you're asking me questions and stuff like that in chat, chances are I'm not going to see it. I do apologize, but just trying to run the presentation and read the chat, with which we have close to 400 people, would make it, fairly difficult. So I'm going to do as good as I can, but if you ask a question a bunch of times and I'm not answering you, I promise you I'm not ignoring you, I'm just not seeing it. So, okay. So last week, we talked about terrain, and we talked about sculpting terrain using height maps and using terrain sculpting tools with Unity. And we looked at some hills and valleys and whatnot, and we also talked about texturing. And we talked about how to texture our terrain. So I'm not really going to get into a lot of that this time. I have instead just created some sample terrain that we're going to go ahead and start with. So let me move some stuff out of the way here. So what we have here is we have this nice starter terrain. I've included some mountainous areas in the back. I've got some kind of hills in the front. I've got a beach, and then I've got a bit of a divot in the ground, which I'm going to have some water, so like a lake or an ocean or whatever. Now, granted, this is fairly compacted. Our beach is not very big, our hills are not very big, and our mountains are not very big. All in all, it's all very, very small. As a matter of fact, if I play this, I've got my first-person controller in here. You can see my beach is very narrow, my hills are not very tall, my mountains not very tall. I did this just to make a real quick, easy beginner level, I guess, so that we can see the effects without it being huge, right? I didn't want to have to navigate giant mountains and long stretches of plains or anything like that, so this is all fairly compacted. As a matter of fact, my terrain is only 100 by 100, so fairly small. All right, so if you're sitting there when we get to trees and stuff like that, and you're like, man, that tree is gigantic. Well, the tree is actually a pretty decent size. The world is just so very tiny. So yeah, so I kind of showed you, I played it there, kind of showed you what it looks like in game, but I do want to show you that I've sculpted the terrain using the Unity's tools. No meshes or anything in here. I have my first-person controller, and oops, I accidentally modified the ground. I have my first-person controller right there, and I have a directional light. Say hi, directional light. Where are you at? I have a directional light right there. There we go. So I have a directional light. So those are the things that are in my scene. And if you're looking, you might notice that there's some textures in here that you're not familiar with. So just so you know, I am not using all of the standard asset textures. I have included some additional textures. I'm going to show you how to access those in case you you want to know. So I showed you guys last time how to go to Assets, Import Package, and Terrain Assets. All right there. And these are the terrain assets that gives you like good grass and rocks and grass and cliff texture or something like that. And as a matter of fact, those appear right here in my project view. I have grabbed these other terrain assets. Now these terrain assets are free on the asset store. They were made by Unity back in Unity 1.0, and just due to their size, they don't come packaged with Unity, but you can get them on the asset store. So to access those, if you come up here to Window and Asset Store and pull up in the Asset Store here, and I hope this window works. Sometimes the windows bug out when I'm recording the screen. Looks like it's going to work though, so that's good. We'll wait for this to load. If you come in here and you click terrain, or you type terrain into the search, and give it a second. My computer runs very slow when I'm recording and doing so many different things. You'll find this terrain assets right here made by Unity Technologies, okay? And in here, there's a ton more trees, a ton more materials. We've got details, different grasses, things like that. So if you import these, it's completely free. If you import these, you're going to get a bunch of new stuff. Yeah, 12 trees, 12 bushes, 6 grass types, and 22 terrain textures. So that'll really allow you to build more complete stuff. Okay. So yeah, so that's all in there, and I've already imported that into my project. So if you see me using some stuff and you don't know what it is that you are using, or that I'm using, that's where it comes from. It comes from those assets right there. So yeah, so make a note of those. Those are super useful. There's actually a ton of assets on the asset store. Tons of trees. If I wanted to make a desert, there's desert level packs and stuff like that. And I mean, if you can get all the assets to make an entire desert world for $10 on the asset store, that's a heck of a deal, right? So a lot of that stuff exists in the asset store. So if you're trying to build some pretty complex or some awesome looking stuff, go check it out. The asset store's got a ton of great things. And so there you go. That's my plug for the asset store. Yeah. I'm seeing here code name Z#. Yeah, the asset store window can be a bit slow. That's just kind of how it is. Since it's an internet connection running through the Unity editor, sometimes it's a bit slow. Sometimes it's fast. You know, it all depends on what else I'm doing on my system. Yeah. Okay. So let us get into today's lesson. So when I run this, I'm on my beach, right? And I actually have like 3 different types of sand on here. So I hope you guys appreciate the effort I put into texturing. Some of it's a little bit low res, but it gets the idea, right? So you're running around in this world, and the ground looks okay, looks fine, but it feels kind of empty, right? I mean, look at this. You got this solid blue sky with like unrealistically blue sky. Some of you, this might be gray, depending on your default settings. Some setting defaults are gray sky. There's, you know, no foliage. That part kind of looks a little weak. The mountains don't really look all that great. So all in all, I mean, the terrain looks fine, but the world looks a little flat, looks a little empty, looks a little basic, right? So we are going to talk about the things that we can add to this to make it look better, to make it look more cinematic, to make it look more natural, things like that. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to pause this here, and I'm also gonna, I didn't notice that I had this going on. I like to make my scene view as big as possible. There we go. There we go, much better. Of course, that is going to make my upload lag a little bit because now I'm sending more video data at once, but what are you going to do? Okay, so what I want to start with is I want to start with trees. Okay, now trees, me and trees have kind of a love-hate relationship. Trees look great, and they add a lot of value to a world, but at the same time, I'm no good at trees. I always put too many or too few. And like I said before, this world is kind of compacted, so trees aren't going to look quite right, but I'm still going to show you how to use them. All right, so trees really are better in bigger worlds that make a little bit more sense, but we're going to go ahead and just slather trees on here anyway because we can. All right, so I'm going to click on my terrain here, and I showed you guys the sculpting tools and the blur tool and the texture tool. So all of these, all right, last time. So this time we're going to click right here, and we're going to click on the Place Trees button. All right, Place Trees button, and you're going to notice that the brush is actually quite gigantic, quite big. All right. I'm not going to go ahead and do that just yet because, well, first off, because that wouldn't be very good because I don't want trees down here where my water is going to be, and also because I don't have any trees loaded. All right. So by default, there are no tree assets, but if you import the standard assets, the terrain assets from our assets menu here or from the asset store, then you're going to get these trees. All right. So what you're going to do is once you have tree assets, you're going to click this Edit Trees button right here and add a tree. And we're going to get this dialog right here. Let's see. I'm going to want to make sure the dialog pops up on your screen. It does. Fantastic. And when I click the circle right beside it, I'm going to see all of the trees that I have access to. All right, and a few things that aren't trees, like this third-person guy or this rock. But I'm going to see all the things that could be constituted or could be constituted as trees to place in my scene. And we have things like a palm tree group, palms. I think the palm is the one that comes standard with the standard assets, and the rest of these are extra, or the ones that come in from the asset store. I'm going to choose, what's a beech, right? So I'm going to do palm. Yeah, palm. Okay. And a bend factor is how much this tree is going to bend in the wind. All right. Wind is not something we have in here yet. We'll talk about wind. I'm going to leave the bend factor at 0. Well, you know, that's I don't know. I don't know good min and max values there because I'm guessing I don't ever really play around with the bend factor. So we'll see what happens when I make it 10. So now we have this tree, and I have a couple things. I can click and paint here, or I can click Mass Place Trees. Mass Place Trees is for when I'm feeling like super lazy. All right. I just click this. Go say, hey, how many trees do you want? Give me 100 trees. Place. Oh, hey, it didn't actually place. Oh, yeah, wait, no, it didn't actually place any. That's weird. Let's try that again. Mass Place Trees. Place. Oh, it did bring them in. They're just super tiny. That's weird. Well, the palm group asset is very, very tiny, isn't it? Let's undo that. Why are those so small? So every tree is a little bit different in size. I'm actually going to remove that tree and pick a different one. I'm going to pick a tree. I'm going to pick the standard palm one. Are those super small too? My terrain isn't very big, so... Oh, I didn't hit add. There we go. Why are those palm trees coming in so tiny? Well, while I'm wondering why they appeared so very, very small, I can show you this here. So we have our brush size. Okay, obviously that affects our brush size, and for the trees, our brush can actually get quite large. Okay, because we use it to make forests and things like that. Then we have the tree density, which if you have an older version of Unity, tree density used to be tree spacing, I believe is what it's called. The tree spacing is how many or how much space is in between each tree, and they've kind of removed that and they made it tree density instead. All right, so we can say per one brush click, how many trees do we want placed, or how dense do we want that to be? And then we have color variation. The color variation is just how much each tree will be a little bit different from each other, which is nice so that not all tree looks exactly the same, right? Then we also have tree height, and I suppose I can bump that up a bit, and maybe that'll fix my tiny tree issue. And then we have a variation on tree height, again, so not every tree is exactly the same, because that would look pretty bad. We have tree width, all right, again, how wide the tree is, and variation, again, so we don't have all the same. Let's see, so those trees are still very tiny. Let's try a different asset. Let's try a sycamore. There, hey, now our sycamore is gigantic. Perfect. We'll stick with the sycamore. I don't know that sycamores grow near beaches, but today, sycamores are growing near beaches. Like I said, I just loaded all of these assets. I actually, when I was playing around earlier, I used the sycamore tree, so I knew that one was going to work. I didn't use the palm one. But as you see, that sycamore is huge, right? Let's place that a little bit closer to my guy and run it, and you can see that that is a gigantic sycamore. Not exactly what we want. So let me click on my terrain. To get rid of trees, I can just hold down Shift and click again and they go away. So let's do this here. Let's decrease my brush size, decrease my density that will allow me to place them more specifically, really reduce my height and my variation. There we go. Now we can create sycamores that look, well, that's a bit too small, isn't it? It's a fine-tuning thing. That's a pretty decent looking sycamore. Oh, okay, fantastic. So we can do something along those lines. That looks reasonable enough. Okay. Shift click. Okay. So again, clicking allows you to place trees. Shift clicking allows you to remove them. Okay. So you can basically straight up murder your terrain with some trees, and then you can just remove it real quick again. Now I can show you mass placed trees, since the trees are not super tiny. Alright, so mass placed trees, let's say 25 in place. And there we go. So it kind of just places trees for us. And let me change my brush size here and get rid of some of the ones that don't make sense, like all of them, because they're sycamore trees on a beach, but whatever. And we can have something kind of along those lines. Alright. So that allows us to create trees. Now, you will notice, pay attention to this tree specifically as I zoom out and zoom back in. Alright? Hopefully you notice how it is warping like that. Alright? That warping, okay, that is a billboarding process. What effectively that means is that as I get far away, it reduces in quality so that I'm not expending a ton of resources. Okay? And then as you zoom in, it gets much larger, or it gets more larger and high quality and stuff like that. Alright? Fantastic. Okay, let's remove those. Let's find, let me go to edit trees. Let me add another tree. So you can just keep adding trees how you want. Let's go bamboo. I think a bamboo tree could be here, right? Let's put just basically a little forest area here and maybe here. So just two little forest areas. Alright. And I'm going to grab bamboo. I'm going to reduce the density, reduce the brush size. Over here, let's reduce our tree height and our variations. There we go. And we can place some trees here. Let me up my density a little bit. A little bit more. Come on, trees. There we go. Maybe a little bit too much there. There we go. And I'll go ahead and remove a couple of these that are a little where I don't want them to be. There we go. Okay, and so basically placing trees is like placing anything else. It's like painting, right? We use our brush, we can choose the densities to choose how many trees are there, and then we can use our variations and stuff like that to add some randomness to it. Really the best way to handle trees is to hand place them as meshes, right? If you're lazy like I am, you can place them like I have, where it's just basically fast and easy to kind of drop some trees in here like this. But really, it's much better to kind of spend some time and hand place and hand sculpt and stuff like that. Alright, so we've got some trees here, and yeah, that's the tree tool. So basically fairly easy to use. Let me get out of there. And it's just a matter of painting. Alright. Now, if you are using Unity Basic, or Unity Free, I guess, you might have some issues with directional lights where some of your trees appear black, okay? And effectively what that is I'm just telling you this now because a lot of you might still have that. What effectively that is the light is hitting taller trees and is counting as being the lit tree, and smaller trees around it get turned dark. Okay, because they are quote-unquote in the shadows. Alright, that's not something you're going to see happen on mine. I'm using Unity Pro, which has more accurate dynamic lighting. But if you're using Unity Free and that happens, you could just remove the dark trees or space your trees out a bit more, and then it becomes less of an issue. So a question came through, can you still walk through trees placed on the terrain? Yes, there's no collision by default on these trees. Now, that being said, I can modify my tree prefab to have a collider on it, okay? And once we have those colliders on there, and we notice in our terrain collider how we have this create tree colliders right here, all right, then we will collide with our trees and not be able to move through them. So we have to put a capsule collider on the tree prefab and have this checked right here, and then we won't be able to walk through our trees anymore. All right, so we can in fact make that happen. By default, I leave them as they are. Me personally, when I'm making a level, I try not to put the trees really anywhere the player's going to encounter. They just kind of exist above and beyond where the player can't reach, for me, because I'm lazy and I don't like to take the time to make the roots or the bottoms of the trees look all right. Okay. Okay, so question, a mesh collider won't work. I don't believe a mesh collider will work. To my knowledge, capsule colliders and then the terrain collider is the only way for the collision with trees to work. You wouldn't want to do a mesh collider anyway because it's really going to be inefficient. Once you have a lot of trees in there, it's really going to slow your game down. So I would not advise mesh colliders on trees. Maybe if you have a couple bigger, more unique trees and stuff like that, but it's generally always a better idea to use more generic primitive shaped colliders with lower polygon counts. Otherwise you're going to run into some inefficiencies and things are going to slow down and you're going to have some issues there. Low poly is kind of the name of the game in that regard. Okay, so that's trees. So just be careful with the lighting and stuff like that. So it might help to spread trees out unless you're using Unity Pro. You might be using Unity Free and never have that issue, and that's fine, right? It all depends on how the light hits it and if they're too close and if one's bigger than the other and stuff like that. You know, you may not have that problem. But just in case you do, in case you're like, hey, I have black trees, why? I'm just telling you why. So, okay, so that is our trees. So now let's go ahead and look at some grass and details. So in Unity, we don't have like a special paint grass button. Instead, all of those little things are called details. And that's this button right here. All right, the paint details button. Now you are going to see just like with trees, we have a lot of the similar stuff. So we have our brush size, our opacity, and our target strength. Okay, and again, we have our brushes and we have the ability to add our different textures. Okay, so let's go ahead and add some grass. Grass, again, is one of those things that I tend to just way overdo it. So I'm going to go ahead and, here, I'll show you what I did there. I'm going to hit Edit Details, Add Grass Texture. That's going to bring up this little dialog right here. And then I have a few options here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click this little circle, and I'm going to choose what I want for my grass. And the standard assets come with this grass right here. And then if you download the terrain assets from the asset store, you get a lot of these other ones. So we can do like weeds, a bunch of different types of weeds, some white flower. I'm going to choose weed, this weed right here. And I'm going to talk about will more trees in the game pull much more resources to render the game? Was a question by Dave. Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Like I said, I try to avoid trees and grass in mass through these tools, but again, I'm kind of lazy. But I tend to overdo them, and then they end up being resource hogs, stuff like that. If done properly, you won't see a major impact, but if done improperly, like I tend to do, you're going to end up really slowing down and hurting the performance of your game. So always with caution. My general rule of thumb, what I tell people, is place trees if trees in that spot will benefit your level in some way. Don't place trees just because, right? Don't place grass just because. Place it only if it actually adds something. Otherwise, you know, it's going to make your game slower, and it's really not going to benefit you at all. Okay, so I've picked this weed as my grass. Now I have this minimum width, and the minimum width is obviously how small it can be wide. Maximum width is obviously this maximum width. And then that allows us to, it'll randomly choose between those two widths so that we have some variation. We don't want our grass looking all the same again because all that uniformity really kind of breaks the illusion of naturalness, right? In nature, it's all kind of random. We also have our minimum height and our maximum height. Our noise spread, if our grass uses some form of noise, all right, we can increase the noise. And increasing the noise might be how much the leaves change, or how many leaves are on a branch, or it all depends on if your grass actually uses this, and if it uses this affects how much. And then we have our healthy color and our dry color. All right. So my one big gripe here is our healthy color always starts off so bright, and this is not, in fact, even close to remotely looking like a natural green. So I like to always click on this and bring it straight down a bit to a more natural darky green. And same with the dry color, bring that down a bit. All right. With less neon is always better in my opinion. Otherwise, it just kind of appears neon. And finally, we have this billboard. I'll explain what this does in just a second. All right, so I clicked add. Now I have my weed right here. I'm going to choose a brush that's a bit more patchy. I don't really want to use a circular brush because that won't look very good. So I'm going to choose kind of a patchy brush like this right here. And let me talk about these settings. So our brush size we're all familiar with. It's, how big the brush is. We also have this opacity and target strength. And a lot of people get confused by what opacity and target strength do, because they seem to do the same thing, but not quite. So opacity is the strength of the brush, right? So if I had, I think this goes between 0 and 1, right? So it's normalized between 0 and 1. So if I had like 0.1, this would be like a 10% strength. Right? So drawing with this, if I drew with this 10 times, I'd eventually get to 100% strength, right? This is my opacity. So it's how strong my brush is. Now my target strength also goes from 0 to 1, but target strength is like a limit. So if I set my target strength to 50, I can never get beyond, or 0.5, I can never get beyond 50% strength, no matter how many times I draw with my opacity. All right? So that's kind of what that does, right? So your opacity will build up to your target strength, but your target strength is kind of like your cap. Okay? All right, so with that explained, let's zoom in here, and let's give myself some grass. I'm going to kind of tuck some in right there, and you can see I've got some grass right there. That is, that's a bit more than I like, so I'm going to hold down Shift and kind of get rid of that. Let's try this again. I'm going to bring my opacity down, or my brush size on the lead, bring my opacity down a little bit more, and my brush size down a bit more. Even more than that. And I'll shift click and slowly remove some of those weeds. There we go. Until I get it a little sparse. Okay. There we go. And I'll do the same here. Kind of spread it out a little bit. Shift clicking to kind of... There we go. I'm not going to go ahead and add grass all over the place here. I'm just going to do this right now so you kind of see how it goes. It can take a while to get it right. And I am by no means an expert on nature or art. I hardly ever go outside, so there we go. We'll leave that for right now. We'll leave some grass just right there, just so we can kind of see the different ways this works. So I'm going to go ahead and hit play, and first thing I'm going to see is that my grass kind of flows in the wind. All right, that's really nice the way that does that. I'll show you later how we can control that. We can control how strong the wind is and stuff like that. The question, can we mass place grass? No, we cannot. We cannot. Well, we can. We can just use the brush and just brush all over the place. But there's no just one-click mass place grass. So we see the grass kind of blowing in the wind. We also see that I might want to change my height variation a bit because these all look kind of exactly the same, and to me that's a little boring, right? You will see some color variation. You see how some of them are darker green and some of them are more yellow. Hopefully you guys can see that. That's those two color pickers we chose. So some are dry, some are not dry. So some are yellowish and some are more green. Also notice this. Pay attention to the grass itself. Notice how it's always facing me, right? See how it's always facing me. I never can move around it. It always turns to face me. All right. That's what we call billboarding. All right. A billboard is a 2D image that always faces the camera so that it appears 3D. All right. If it appears that there's a 3D mass of this grass, but there's not. They're all flat. They're all billboarded. All right. And as a matter of fact, if I come back out of my scene, if I click Edit Details, and edit with my weed selected, and I come down here to uncheck billboard, and then I run it, you will see quite the opposite. You will see that it stays flat, and that I can see that it's flat. Right? You see the flatness of it. Okay, so without billboarding, that's kind of what happens. Billboarding is important for terrain because our trees will billboard at a distance, and our grass billboards and things like that. And actually, let me edit that again. Let me change my width to be 0.5, and my maximum width to be 2, min height to be 0.5, max height to be 4. See how that does it. Bit more of a variation. We can see some thinner, smaller ones, some bigger, thicker ones. Really, I'd want to maybe reduce the amount of this in here a little bit. Drop my opacity down and kind of remove some of those stalks. Thin it up a bit. Anyway, so with grass, we can kind of, it's all about just being moderate with it and kind of taking it easy and kind of not overdoing it. As you can see, if I were to say like target strength 1, opacity like 44, brush size a bit bigger, I can just right? And yeah, we can add all this grass, but at the same time, when I run this, right, it's gonna run slow, and oh my god, grass everywhere, right? And so we can certainly do that if we want to, all right? But being much more reasonable with our grass is a much better way to go about it, okay? And you can also say edit details, add grass. I'm going to choose a new grass. I'm going to add some white flowers. Again, I'm going to maybe, heck, let's make white flowers kind of reddish. I don't know, just for fun, just to see how different we can make it. And select the white flowers. There, target strength small, opacity small, size, kind of put some, there we go. And you can see how that kind of breaks it up a bit, makes it look a bit more natural. All right, the white flowers are great because you can just specify what color you want, and then they are that color, right? Because it's white, so you add any color to the white, and all of a sudden it's that color. So now when I run this, and you can see now I've got kind of a, breaks it up a little bit, have a little scrub and brush and stuff there, and kind of makes it look a bit more realistic. Maybe not for a beach, but we're kind of ignoring the fact that this is supposed to be a beach right now with all this foliage here. Realistically, I might want to put those up here, as a matter of fact. Let's bring this down a bit and just kind of, oh, I forgot, let me edit this. I don't want them to be up to 4 anymore, I want them to be small again. Kind of place some around the base of the trees, and you can do that. You place them around the base of the trees, and then all of a sudden they don't look so unnatural. And you got yourself a nice little oasis over here. All right. Always, again, it's a good idea to use the grass and stuff like that built specifically for your world, so it meshes a bit more. I'm kind of taking different assets and putting them all together, so it kind of looks a little disparate. Yeah. So there we go. Okay, so grass. So we can paint trees, we can paint grass, and that adds an element of being alive to our scene. And actually, while I'm here, I'm going to come back over here to my sycamore tree. I'm going to come up here to the mountains, and I'm going to place a couple. And actually, no, I'm not going to do sycamore trees. I'm going to add a tree, pine. Where's my pine? Pine would grow up in mountains, right? I suppose. I don't know. Seems reasonable. Reduce my brush size. I just want to be able to place a pine tree. Oh, I'm still on sycamore. Pine. There we go. A pine tree. Way too big. Alright. Tree height. Bring that down. Variation. There we go. Right? We might see pine trees up in the mountain. This is where I like to place trees. Like way up in the background where you can't really get to it, though you could get here if you wanted to. But they just kind of break up the sky a bit. Alright. So you can see them kind of up there in the distance. Some pine trees looking all piney and whatnot. They're a bit taller than they really should be, but whatever. Alright, you guys get the idea, right? So with time, you kind of you can kind of figure that stuff out a bit. All right, and the trees really should be a bit smaller. As a matter of fact, if I don't remove this one, it's just going to bother me. There we go. Okay, so we've seen how to place trees, we've seen how to place grass. But as we noticed before, how the trees kind of warp as you move in and out, let me show you how we control that, okay? So our very next, well, we saw trees here and we saw painting details. Let's look at the very next one here, which is the terrain settings, all right? And we have the base terrain, which handles our shadows and materials and pixel errors, and I don't really care about those right now. I'm interested here in the tree and detail objects, okay? So first off, I can turn my trees and grass on and off, okay? So we can definitely do that, all right? But more importantly is this idea of detailed distance and detailed density, all right? Using this, I can control how far away my details are drawn and how many are drawn at a time. Okay, you see how if I'm moving this slider here and I'm changing my detail density, okay, and also if I pull this slider way down, they disappear. So if I have a game with a lot of grass, okay, I can turn down my detail distance so it only draws as I get closer. You see how it kind of fades in and out? That's for efficiencies, right? You don't want to draw a bunch of stuff that's too far away to be seen. So controlling that will help you reduce the inefficiencies in your programming or in your game, right? If you have a lot of these details, and you can kind of adjust that. I'm getting a lot of questions. Can we switch the tree and grass drawing in a script? You can do just about anything in a script, really. I know there are a lot of terrain generation scripts available in the asset store. You can write your own. A lot of them exist. It's entirely up to you. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff that you can do through scripting. Okay, so we have our detail distance and our detail density. We also have our tree distance. So again, I can reduce how far away trees appear. All right, to start, that is at 2000. I also have this thing called billboard start and fade length. So billboard start is how far away before the tree starts to turn into a billboard, all right, for efficiency's sake. Remember how I showed you that warping the trees did? Watch this tree right here. How it kind of, watch how this tree changes. See that? So that is billboarding, okay? Both of these trees are doing it right there. It starts at 50. If I wanted to, I could reduce that down to 5, so it wouldn't start to billboard back until I got within 5. See? Now that would be kind of silly, because that looks kind of bad, but I could do that. Let me take this back up. If you're targeting stronger computers, right, you can turn this up even past 50 to like 300 or so. But that's what that does. Okay, so we can control how far away. I like to keep this around, I don't know, like 100. That's my personal preference. And then we also have this fade length. So you'll actually, let me turn this back down again so I can really illustrate this to you. We'll make it 20. So we see that it turns from a billboard into a tree. It's kind of a transition, all right? It's a fade from one to the next. I can change how long that fade takes. It starts at 5, but if I make that fade 0, it'll just snap. Boom, right? No transition whatsoever. Likewise, I can make it 30, and the fade will be very slow. So right here, billboard, very slow until it's full, right? So it's barely noticeable when I increase that. Okay, very slow process. So I can change those right there. All right, I'll change those back for you. All right, there we go. All right, and then we have the fade length. Oh, the max trees. So max trees dictates how many trees can be drawn at a time, right? Or I believe how many different trees. Max trees. Yeah, I believe it is. No, it's how many trees I believe can appear in a scene. But I believe it defaults to a minimum value before it starts clipping them off. All right, next we have our wind settings. This is what's going to control our grass. All right, we saw that our grass moves in the wind, and this is how we control it through our wind settings right here. All right, and so what we can do is we can increase our speed. Like if we turn this all the way up to 1, we can see that our grass is really going to start whipping around. All right, we'll leave that back down. We can change our wind size, and we can change the bending, right? So if I turn these all up, we're going to get real heavy pushes, real big wind and stuff like that, stuff's really going to be moving. Likewise, I can turn this down, all right, and I'm just going to get a little subtle effect, all right, very little movement, just kind of a tiny bit. You can barely even see that, just tiny, right? So we can control our wind. Interestingly enough, grass tint is in the wind settings. I'm not entirely certain why. But we can change the tint of all of our grass right through here. So we can, you know, give it all kind of a whatever, an overall feel to it. And we can use, we can just use this to kind of dictate a general color change in there. All right. So the rest is the resolution settings and stuff like that, which we talked about last time. All right. So at this point, we have a terrain here. We've got some grass and some trees and stuff like that. All right. I'm not very good at placing grass and trees. Again, I'll just warn you. So it looks okay. You know, it's kind of hokey. It takes me a little bit of time to make anything worthwhile with trees and grass. But now we get to the stuff that I'm a little bit better at. Okay. So let's talk about some of the other environmental effects, in my opinion, have a much larger impact on what we do. So right next, I'm going to talk about skyboxes. If you've worked in other engines, maybe like UDK or something like that, they're called sky domes. In Unity, though, they're called skyboxes. I prefer a skybox to a sky dome. A sky dome is basically a semicircle that fits like a bowl over your level, and that's all right, except if you look down, there's nothing there, unless you take the sky dome and you duplicate it and invert it. A skybox, however, is a giant cube that fits over your whole level and is textured on the inside in such a way that it appears to be circular and infinite and stuff like that. All right. So let's look at this. So by default, there are no skyboxes available to us, but we can come to Assets, Import Package, Skyboxes, and we'll get this nice import package, which we'll click import, and then we get some nice skyboxes available to us. And there's a couple ways we can apply a skybox to our world. There's two actually. So the first is if I click on the camera of my first-person controller. It's the only camera I have in my scene. I've deleted my other camera. All right, if I click there, I can apply a skybox to it by clicking Add Component, and let's see here. I can never remember because I think they move it around on me. They say they don't. Yeah, okay. So what we do is we're going to click Add Component, Rendering, Skybox, right there. And that will add a skybox component where it says Custom Skybox. And if I'm going to click this little circle next to it, and I get all of these different textures. I could make my sky a banana plant, but I don't think I'm going to. Instead, I'm going to choose this specific skybox called Sunny 2 Skybox. All right, I'll just double click that, and we will see that nothing happens. All right, nothing has changed. But when I run my scene, okay, I get this nice skybox. All right. All right, that's looking pretty good. That's much better than the blue or the gray or anything like that. All right, there we go. Fantastic. All right, but we don't see it in the scene view. That's because it's just on that camera. The reason we might want to add a skybox to a camera is in case we have multiple cameras and we want to have multiple views, maybe with different skyboxes, right? So if I had like 7 cameras, I don't know why I would, but if I had 7 cameras and they were all looking at the world a little bit differently, I could put 7 different skyboxes on each of those cameras, right? Maybe if I wanted to, I don't know, have a rage mode, right, where you pick up a power-up and you go all rage and the sky turns red. Well, we could have a camera kind of preloaded with that red skybox on it, and we just flip which one we're seeing. I'm not suggesting that might be a good way to go about it, but we certainly could, right? And that's what that's what some of the stuff that we can do. So if we apply a skybox to a camera, it is only on that camera. And if we switch to a different camera, we no longer see that skybox. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and remove this component now. Get rid of the skybox there. All right. And then I am going to come to so the second way we can add a skybox is we can add it to the whole scene. The nice thing about that is that we get to see it in the scene view, and all cameras will share the same skybox. So if I come to Edit, and I come to Project Settings, Render Settings, and we'll see the render settings appear here in the inspector. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click Skybox Material, and I'm going to choose Sunny 2, and there we go. Now we can see it in our scene view. And I don't have to add it to my camera. Everyone will be the same. All right, so I can just kind of see this in here. I see quite a few questions about moving the clouds and stuff like that. So Skybox just uses a material. So we can have an animated material, and we can animate the clouds that way, or we can use code to change the UV coordinates of the Skybox itself. By changing the UV coordinates, the clouds, we can actually make them move, right? Because we can change the offset. All right. Yeah. So there's a lot of different ways we can approach that if we want to. All right. That's kind of beyond the scope of this right here, but there are ways to do it. Don't think that it just can't be done. But as far as talking about the default stuff without a lot of work, it's pretty much static. All right. But it can be done, and it's actually not all that hard. Okay. So now we have our skybox. So already our world is looking kind of nice here, right? Not too bad. Okay, so we've got some trees, some really bright and obnoxious grass that's very sparse, and we've got some nice, brilliant clouds. And there's a sun in the sky somewhere. There we go, sun in the sky. Okay, so again, skybox, just two different ways that we can approach adding the skybox to our level. All right. Next, I want to talk about fog. All right, and you might be thinking fog is like, it's misty and it's morning and whatnot. And that's true, but we also have a fog like haze, right? So if you've ever looked at something way in the distance, right? Or if you've ever taken a picture of nature with a large, long overlook, whatever, and you see that the background kind of turns kind of bluish or kind of faded and stuff like that, we can also use fog to emulate that. So I still have my render settings open, but if you forget, I got here by going to Edit, Render Settings, all right? And you see now I have fog. Just by clicking this, I can turn fog on, okay? This is all right, but this is like if the world was like, it was like a foggy morning or something like that, all right? If I just hit play with the default settings, it's kind of, like that fog appears like pretty darn close, right? I don't really want that. So what I can do is, well, first off, I'm going to emulate a haze. So I'm not going to pretend that it's foggy. I'm going to pretend that it's kind of hazy. So I'm going to find blue and kind of change this to be just maybe a little blue cyan. Okay, there we go, something like that. All right, to emulate a nice haze fog in the distance. And right now, my fog mode, so we have a couple different fog modes. We have linear, and linear is an even fog from beginning to end. All right, which is all right. I prefer exponential, and man, that's really sensitive. Nope. Yeah, our distance isn't all that great. Exponential makes for kind of a better, more accurate fog when your world is actually big enough to make use of it. When it's not, let's just do linear, and let's change. Okay, so let me explain these two. So linear, we'll use this, linear fog start and linear fog end. That determines how far the fog goes out. What I want to do is I'm going to increase the start so we don't get any fog near us, right? Because it doesn't make sense for there to be any fog near us. And you can see as I'm sliding this, the fog kind of subsides, right? There we go, that seems pretty reasonable. And the fog end is how far out we'll hit maximum fog. Fog density is not used for this, okay? If we do switch to exponential or exponential 2, all right, then we use fog density to kind of determine how quickly the fog onsets. And you can see that it's very sensitive, all right, but I'll leave that at linear because those settings work quite nice for me. So I'll run this. And if I come up here, you'll see that I've got just a little bit of a haze on the mountain in the back. Not a ton, but it's not a very big world. The bigger the world is, all right, the more effective fog and background haze will be, all right? So it's just tiny, but it's really just kind of a tiny fog because the world is not all that big. And if I wanted to change how effective the fog was, I could change how quickly it starts. We'll say maybe 30. It'll start 30 units away. All right, and then our fog will be apparent more quickly, and it'll be stronger in the background. Okay, so fog is a nice way to, like I said, add haze, add a sense of distance. Though, I mean, completely fair, if I wanted the world to be foggy, right, like an early morning fog, right, I could just do something like exponential 0.01, right, and it's a bit foggy. I could make it stronger if I wanted to make it stronger. If I wanted it to be a sandstorm, give me some browns in here. Obviously, you'd want to add some sand or some sand particles and stuff like that as well. But you could do something like this to emulate a sandstorm. All right, I would want to make that closer. Oh, actually, as someone who's been in a sandstorm, that looks about right. That's actually more visible than it really is anyway. Anyway, so we can emulate all sorts of effects, right? Creepy red sky, right? Well, let's reduce that a bit. All right, and we can achieve all sorts of strange, misty effects with our fog. All right, so it's not just fog, as in like early morning fog. It's all sorts of fog. It's pretty much any time where we want to tint the world a specific color over time. A question: is this accessible through scripting? Is this accessible at runtime? And the answer is yes. Pretty much, I don't know. Most of the time with Unity, if your question is it accessible in runtime or with scripting, it doesn't really matter what you're talking about. The answer is generally yes. It's very accessible. The only time that I've ever wanted to access something with scripting that I haven't been able to, it was with the new particle system, and it's my understanding that eventually we should be able to. So, okay. So yeah, so that's our fog. And if we leave that in there, you know, just a tiny bit, we get a nice distance effect. Like I said, that distance effect makes it look more realistic. All right. Okay, so we have some trees, some grass, a skybox, and a fog effect. Now, I want this to be a beach, right? And so what I'm going to do is I kind of want this to look like it just goes off into the distance, kind of like the ocean or whatever, all right? Well, we can do that, all right? And we're going to do that using Unity's water. Now, one of the main sticking points between Unity Free and Unity Pro is the water, okay? And allow me to show you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to Assets, Import Package, and I am going to grab Water Basic, okay? And I'm going to hit Import. And if you don't have Unity Pro, this is the water you're going to use. All right, and where is that at? Where did that go? Went into Standard Assets, Water Basic, Daylight Water. All right, and let me just kind of move this around because water is just a giant disk. And spread it out a bit. All right, and that gives us some water. Now, let me scale it a bit more, bring it out a bit. Let's run my scene. So this, I mean, it's serviceable, right? It is serviceable as water. It's very, very blue, but what are you going to do, right? But it's the same color and everything no matter what. All right, so that's basic water. And I'm going to go ahead and actually remove that. So let me show you Pro Water. I'm going to Assets, Import Package, Water Pro, Import. The nice thing about Water Pro is that we can use render materials. Pro can use render materials and Basic cannot, which is why Pro's water looks so much better. We are able to render onto the surface of the water the reflection of the sky and the stuff that's underneath of it. All right, so let me come down here to Water Pro. There we go. And drop that down a bit, bring it in a bit, drop it down a bit. There we go. Scale it a bit. Scale it a bit more. Scale it a bit more. And you can see it's a giant disk. That looks reasonable. Kind of higher, maybe. Okay, and so now when we press play, there we go. Right? Now if I added some heavier fog out here in the distance, it would really sell the effect that this water just kind of goes on forever. Right? If I use a different skybox too, this skybox tends to go white right over here. It really should drop a little bit lower. If it dropped a little bit lower, it would sell it much more. But that's just this particular skybox. We could use a bunch of different ones. Right? But you can see how it reflects the world. All right? Yeah, so that's very effective. And actually, I can very easily, check this out, I can very easily change how everything looks. I'm just going to lower that. I'm going to bring in some nighttime water. Right there. And I'm going to change my skybox from sunny to nighttime. Oh, that's not right. Do I not have a nighttime skybox? I might not have a nighttime skybox. dawn, dusk, eerie. Oh, hey, let's check that out. All right, and all of a sudden I can build water at night, right? So, you know, you can quickly and easily change your world very, very simply, just with some subtle effects, right? So now I've got my fog in the background, I've got some nighttime, I've got some night water, right? So it's actually pretty slick, all right? And yeah, as someone pointed out, you just fall right through the water. You could add a trigger collider to the water that triggered buoyancy or anything like that if you wanted to make that a little bit more realistic. But by default, water is just a material. It's just kind of a circular plane there with a water render material applied to it. I'm going to change my render settings back to the skybox that I wanted, which is Sunny 2. There we go. So yeah, there we go, boom. And now we've got this kind of infinite water. We can actually see the clouds are reflected on the water. So the sky is actually reflected down. We can see the sand a bit underneath. So it makes for a very effective effect, I guess. It makes for a very effective image, okay? So now we've got our grass, our fog, our skybox, and our water, okay? Someone asked, can we increase waves? Actually, yeah, we can do a lot of stuff. So if I click on the water, you can see that there's actually a lot of things in the editor. I'm not even going to pretend to be able to tell you what they do because I've never ever looked at any of them. But you can change your reflections, your light refractions. You can change all sorts of stuff. So yes, there is certainly a way to check that out. Jay Callan asks, is there a way to see frame rates in the renderer? If I go to game and I turn on my stats, when I run this, I can see my stats. So I'm running at 71, 68 frames per second. This is not tethered to my monitor, so it's not keeping it low. It's actually running low. It's running rather inefficiently, but it's doing so because I am recording my screen and recording a video and doing all these things at the same time. So normally it would be, yeah, and it's also, yeah, as pointed out, it's also a debug build, so it's going to run a bit slower, okay? So don't think, oh man, he only did that much and it's not working at all. It's only that way because of all the stuff I'm doing at the same time. And if I were to build this, it would actually be much better. All right, so cool. So now we have water and fog and trees and grass and a skybox. Let's look at one more thing I want to talk about today. Is I want to talk about a lens flare. All right. So a lens flare is going to be that in my opinion, that final touch on a level. And to kind of show you what I'm talking about, all right, if I'm in my world here, I can see that my sun is right there, okay? But I can see that my shadow is facing me, right? My shadow's right here. So my shadow and the sun are not lining up, okay? That's because my directional light is in a different spot than the sun. And as a matter of fact, I can look at the sun just fine without any real effect. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to change things a little bit, and I want to have a lens flare. Okay, so again, that's an asset I can load. You can create your own lens flares, but I'm just going to come into Assets, Import Package. Where are you? Light flares, and hit Import. And light flares will be added. We can see the different light flares. What I'm going to do is I'm going to find my direction light. Right there, and I'm going to go to where it says flare, and I am going to choose sun. Alright, now I don't really have to do anything else, and that's specifically because my main camera already has a flare layer on it. If my camera did not have this flare layer, I would have to add one, or else it would not be able to see that flare. Alright, okay. Alright, and I will hit play, and so now I can look at my sky and find my flare. There's my sun. Alright, but that's not exactly where I want it to be, is it? It needs to be over there. So the easiest way to fix this, because our flare will render here in the scene view. The easiest way to fix this is to find the light in the scene view and to rotate it. Where is my light? To rotate it so that it overlies. Boom. There we go. Fantastic. Now when I run my scene, I look up at the sun, I get a nice lens flare, and my light matches the light of the skybox. Alright, so now the shadows will be in the right spot on the other side of stuff, over here, and if I look up at the sun, I get this nice like, oh, maybe I shouldn't be looking at the sun, I'm burning my retinas. All right, and we don't want to burn our retinas, so we look away. But it's just this kind of nice finishing touch to really make the world look real. All right, and of course I can see the limits of the water here. I could make my water bigger so it went even further out past draw distance or whatever, but you get the idea. All right, so where we started with to where we are now, the world looks much better in my opinion, right? So we have the same texture and sculpting, but now we have all these things that kind of make it look more complete, more inviting and more realistic. Okay. So, so I see a few questions. People are saying it's all about the water and the swimming and stuff like that. And basically, there's no super simple way of doing that. I would put a trigger on the water, and if you touch the trigger in the water, right, it puts you into a floating control mode until you left the water, and it took you out of the floating control mode. I'm sure there are other ways to do it. I've never actually implemented a game where you had to swim, so I'm by no means an expert on that. But yeah, there are certainly ways to do that. If you want, another question is if you wanted to prevent people from just going in the water there, you could just put a game object collider on the edge of the water so that when the player tried to go into it, they would just stop. I mean, that's really simple. All right. Yeah. So that's actually pretty easy to do. Okay, so that's going to kind of wrap up my talk about environments here. So we've talked about the assets and how to get assets from the asset store. We've talked about trees and how to add them. You got to see my super midget trees because the palm trees apparently imported very small. We got to talk about grass and details. By the way, details is more than just grass. We can place rocks with details, fallen logs, all those things. I just happened to use grass because those were the assets I had available to me. But details can be all sorts of stuff. So if I click on detail or click on my terrain and go to the details section and I go to edit detail, you can see that I can add a detail mesh. Not just grass. I can add, actually there's a rock mesh right there. Well, heck, I'll show you this here real quick. I was wrapping up and everything, but you've convinced me to stay. That's not good. I forgot my colors there. And it's changed my colors. This is a rock, so let's make it more rock-like. Maybe a little bit of tan. And then we could place some rocks, right? Details. So, yeah, whatever. You can straight up murder your scene with details. But yeah, so details are more than just grass. Okay, so yeah, we talked about trees, we talked about grass, we talked about the different terrain settings, we talked about skyboxes and how to add them, the different ways to add them. We talked about fog effects, water, lens flares, and a little bit about our scene. For those of you who haven't gone there yet, check out unity3d.com/learn/live-training. You can see all of the trainings we have coming up on there. Again, if you have any questions, comments, just want to chat, check us out at Unity3D, at Mike Geig, at Will Goldstone, at The Ant Ranch. We're always willing to chat and take your suggestions. If you have anything you want to see, just let us know. We'll be more than happy to check that out. I believe the next lesson, as someone posted, I think the next one is cameras. I don't remember. But we got a lot of cool stuff coming up. Even if it's not on the site, we have a ton of stuff coming up. So a lot of stuff is in the plan, so stay tuned. We obviously starting very simple, but we will be getting very complex. We'll be doing some intermediate and some advanced stuff as well. So all of this stuff will be coming along. Anyway, that's where we're at. So thank you all very much for sticking around. If you have any questions, like I said, send them our way. If you make some projects and you want us to check them out, send them our way. We always love to see it. Check us out on Facebook, Twitter, all that stuff. And I will be talking to you guys next week. Always check out the unity3d.com/learn. We got all sorts of videos and stuff like that on there. And we're making new stuff every single day. So, all right. Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.